Hi, everybody.
Hi, Daniel.
It is good to be back here again. The subject for today is family ties, and we have two stories, again by Romanians, about family. Family is important to all of us. In this country, so we had a writing workshop yesterday with 17 participants responding to prompts from childhood, and it dredged up a lot of family, a lot of family stuff, I'll say, and it got me thinking. We understand ourselves through our families, through our parents, through our siblings, how we were raised. Psychotherapy helps with this, psychoanalysis helps with this, but being able to go back and understand ourselves is the way to live a healthy life going forward. In my own family, or in the kind of person I am, I've struggled or been curious about two things about me. I am afraid of expressing anger, and I avoid conflict. And it's very important for me to fit in, to feel like I fit in. And I never really questioned those things for a long time. It was just who I was. And as an adult, I started looking into who my parents were and what shaped them. My father grew up in the Midwest during the Depression. He in a very poor family. His father was a minister who couldn't hold a job, and he was the oldest son in a family of 5 children, and he was beaten routinely by his parents, who fought constantly. And this wasn't just his father. His mother was equally violent. And it got to the point where he ran away from home. He saved up money from a bus route that he had and ran away from home when he was 12 years old. Made it from Iowa all the way to Dallas, Texas on a bus as a 12-year-old, where he was on the streets for a while and then put in jail because kids weren't allowed to be off on their own, so they were jailed. They reached his parents and said, "Can you send money to have him go back home?" And they said, "No, keep him." They finally were able to reach his paternal grandparents, who he'd stayed with in the past when his family was having financial trouble. And his grandparents sent money, and he went and lived the rest of his childhood very happily with them. He was very determined not to pass along this pattern to me and my brother. And when we were little kids, he would sort of erupt in anger every now and then, but then he managed to just hold it in. He died just in January at 92. He lived a good long life, was a professor of political science, very successful. But he spent his lifetime sort of holding in anger. With my mother, she was born in Austria, in Vienna, Austria. She had a Jewish father and a Catholic mother. This was pre-World War II, and they needed to get out. Her Jewish father worked in the labor ministry in the Austrian government, was smart enough to sense what was going on, got them out. But out, at that point, was going to London, where they then lived through the bombing of London. Came to the United States from that, so that was traumatic in its own, although my mother recalls fondly being in the tube stations and singing. The adults would get them to sing nursery rhymes and sing songs during the bombing, which she said she liked. She thought it was like being in camp. So they moved to the United States, moved to Wisconsin, with German accents. And it was crucial to them to be able to fit in. And that's what they did. And especially my mother, who became such a sort of chameleon that we lived in different places in the United States. We started in Tucson, Arizona. We went to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, then to Charlottesville, Virginia. And all of those places have very different accents, especially Pittsburgh and Virginia. And my mother would adopt the accents of these places. And she wasn't aware of it. It just would happen. It wasn't until really the last few years that when I was in therapy, for not what I thought that was, and we got onto these subjects, and I was talking about what I started talking about, which is my need to fit in and my problem expressing anger. And I was saying, like, well, but my father didn't get angry at us. And he said, it doesn't matter. He said, with trauma, you absorb it. You absorb what your parents went through. And I imagine that has a lot of resonance in this audience and in this country as it does everywhere. You absorb, your parents can be the most honorable people in the world. You absorb what they went through. I want you to think about that in your own lives. What did you absorb from your parents? Think about that while we're listening to these two stories that are by Romanian writers, and what they absorbed. And after we hear these stories, I'd like you to talk to someone near you and share stories about your family life and your parents, and then we can share after that session with the whole group. Anna ULARU.
So the first story is called The Same Woman for 30 Years by Romulus Boldea. The antidepressants my dad takes start working the day Russia attacks Ukraine. February 24th, 2022, finds me in my parents' apartment in Motru. I take advantage of working remotely to cut back on expensive and spend more time with my folks. This is it, Dad says while watching the news on the small TV set in the kitchen. These guys are gonna destroy us. Mom asks what we would like to eat. Dad says to her, I bet you can't even find Ukraine on a map. She ignores him. I wish my sister were home too. I'm the older brother. It wasn't until I was 23 and she was 17 that we were able to talk seriously about our parents. I asked her one day, hey, Evie, what do you think about them? What do you mean? How do you see their relationship? She paused, then said, I've always thought they don't like each other much. I laughed. Same here, I said. Dad throws himself on the bed, takes out his phone and watches some truck driver videos on TikTok. Then Mom comes in and starts nagging him about spending too much time on his phone. You'll burst the blood vessels in your eyes again, she shouts at him. TikTok cured my depression, he says, not bothering to lift his eyes from the screen. Perhaps a child shouldn't judge his parents' love. But I am increasingly convinced that two people who don't like each other very much can still love each other. I know it sounds like a paradox. What I mean is love can be a deep form of commitment beyond the regular feelings associated with it. My mom stayed with my dad under terrible circumstances. Basically, my dad was present only physically for a number of years. He had a major depressive episode in the early 2000s, and she had to get by on her own while raising two small children. Years later, she told me, to this day, I don't know how I managed. I had to go to work, help you with your homework, and Evelina was a baby and I had no one to help me with her. One of my most vivid memories from those days is when Mom came to pick me up from kindergarten. She had been to the market and had left my dad alone with my sister, who was only a few months old. When we got to the door of our apartment, she put the key inside the lock, turned it. Nothing happened. Another key was already in the lock on the inside. She started trembling, then kicked the door and beat her fists against it. I started crying and clinging to her. My dad was taking some heavy medication then. The treatment put him into a deep sleep, but my mother's panic was that he could hurt my little sister. We alerted our neighbor, who brought a hammer and broke the door. Only when we went into the bedroom did my dad wake up and look at us utterly confused. Suffering from a mental illness at the start of the new millennium in a town like Motru sounds like an award-winning film at some obscure festival. First, it's very hard for the people around to understand how a person can become unfit for life from one day to the next. Yesterday you went to work, you did your job, and today you can't get out of bed and tears are running down your expressionless face. Second, the doctors in your small mining town don't deal with depression, so your family turns to the church. But God only helps whomever He feels like. While I wait for the meal, I think about how the first people who can make you feel terribly alone are your own parents. My mom was so present in my life that at one point I came to snub her love. Hitting your child because he can't tie his own shoes or tell the time correctly on a traditional clock face might have something to do with a strong feeling of helplessness. When you're at the end of your tether, it's very hard to control your impulses. And that's why I'm tempted to think that love manifests itself even when you lock up your bad spirits deep down and throw away the key. My own way of showing affection is informed by my parents' way of loving each other. In my relationships, I have tended to make bad, insensitive jokes just like my dad. A few years ago, I had a girlfriend with a big nose. Sometimes she slapped with her hand over her face. One morning I said she did that so that her nose would stop growing. She didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. We broke up a few years later. Another time I told a different girl she read books just so she could brag about reading. What I thought was a good joke, the other person took as an insult, belittlement. But how could I have turned out differently? I grew up hearing my mom tell my dad she could have done much better than him. And Dad always replied that no one would have married her if it hadn't been for him. Somehow, instead of horrifying me, this type of talk has a safe, soothing quality. My parents' bickering makes me feel at home. I tell my dad to thank my mom for setting the plate in front of him. Why act all fake, he says. I snort with laughter, but I also feel a pang of sadness. I think the longest lasting relationships are those in which the partners practice a sort of politeness that resembles a business relationship. It's not about acting fake, but about making an effort to protect the other person from your own irrational impulses. Dad said he'd never known his own mother as anything other than ill. I feel ill is the refrain of her life. When I think about that, I'm glad I've had access to a wider range of emotions in my own mother, even if most of them were negative. In any case, my dad, despite his depression, always manages to make us laugh. An army of shrinks couldn't fix me, he says and laughs. He then takes a bite out of an apple and my mom snaps at him to go to another room because she can't stand the sound of him chewing. I keep thinking about something my dad told me a little while ago. I think too much happiness is what made me sick. He's talking about the time around the birth of my sister, a child he wanted very much. I think it's called postpartum depression. I never thought happiness could make me feel so wretched, he adds, and rests the apple core on the arm of the chair. I know my mom will scream about that. Anyway, no one chooses their parents, no one chooses to be born. Life is something that happens to you, and that's that. I am the product of a union devoid of the kind of passion portrayed in films and romance novels. My mom said she married my dad because she was already 23 and the women in her village were saying she would die an old maid if she didn't find a husband soon. She met my dad at the coal pit, the main workplace for most people in Motru. I asked her what it was she liked about him. Nothing. What was there to like? He was shabby, always wore the same clothes, but he kept looking at me. Then I asked my dad the same thing. She wore a green sweater, he said with a twinkle in his eye. Trying to romanticize violence can be the result of trauma, but I find it hard to fit my parents' dynamic into this logic. Although I have witnessed many screaming matches throughout my childhood, it is my mom's pointed silences that remain most vivid. I knew they'd had a fight for days. My mom would refuse to address him or answer him. "You're not speaking?" my dad would ask. But he never insisted more than 2 or 3 times. He knew that her silence was in part to do with something he had said or done. For a few years now, though, I have only come across comfortable silences when I go home. When you can comfortably sit in silence with a person, that's when you know you found someone special. These days, nobody does what I've done, Dad says. I take a sip of coffee and ask, "What's that?" "Spent 30 years with the same woman." Beautiful story. Bravo, Romans. The second story is called Your Voice in My Head by Agota Kovac. I'm 9 years old, riding in the passenger seat next to my dad. Every now and then, I steal a glance toward him, trying to figure out if he's content, if I can enjoy the ride. He asks me to open a new pack of cigarettes. I rip up the seal, take away the plastic wrapping, and roll the window down. I hold out the wrapper while he steps on the gas. It's a game we play. He must hit a speed at which the packaging breaks from the sheer force of the wind. I urge him to speed up and crank up the volume on the music. We're listening to Frații Petreuși. We know the lyrics by heart. He takes a few turns without slowing down. The speed of the car doesn't scare me, and the cigarette smoke doesn't bother me. I feel like I'm on Top Gear, a show he watches. I'm only afraid if I'm in the back seat. I know I'll get scolded again if I throw up. I feel stronger when the cigarette wrapping tears in my hand. Even though I'm not the one behind the wheel, I want to show him I'm not afraid. Same with getting my first vaccine in school, learning to ride a bike, or watching thrillers together. Each time, I wanted him to see how brave I was. He never did like to praise me. A year later, I'm 10 and it's Sunday morning. I hope we spend the day doing something interesting together. I have a short, boyish haircut. It was his idea that I have a more modern, cooler look than all my classmates. He doesn't know that at school I get, "Are you a boy or a girl?" instead of "hello." After a glass of palinka, a cup of coffee, and a few cigarettes, we'll watch a film on DVD or a show on TV. He sometimes takes my brother and me on hikes in the hills outside of town. He scares us with all sorts of stories about ghosts haunting the abandoned houses or the orchards. I know them by heart, but I persuade him to tell them again every time. I'm learning to swim, and I'm not allowed to come out of the sea until I can swim a few meters. By the end of our vacation, I can swim all the way to the safety buoy and back. On our next vacation, I'm the adventurous daughter, the one who can handle being pushed into the pool, the one who lifts her knees up to her chest before jumping in the water, the one who isn't afraid of waves, amusement parks, or paragliding. After that vacation in Croatia where I learned to swim, his pet name for me is Ribarska, which means fish in Croatian. A few years later, I become Shivalinga, a precious stone that is the village treasure in the Indiana Jones film he watches almost every week. I feel special. I've always strived to be perfect for him. When I'm 12, we spend the summer in the mountain village where he grew up. He makes me prove I'm not a whiny baby. I must walk at night without a lantern all the way to the end of the orchard and back. No matter how hard I try, there's always a new challenge. When I fail, I get slapped across the back. The entire family is to blame for his bad moods. "You lot drive me to smoke 2 packs a day," he always says. I can't remember when we became a family of 5 instead of 4, 2 adults, 2 children, and a bottle of alcohol. Nor when my father's cheeks became streaked with red his stare blank and his smile dumb. As a child, I thought the smell of alcohol was just how grown men smelled. I thought red-faced people were trustworthy and got their strength from potions they drank behind closed doors. I also knew that red-faced people are always sleepy, they want to watch the news quietly, and get angry if you disrupt their routine. My father was a ticking time bomb. At 15, during a school lunch break, I got a call from home. Tell your teacher there's a family issue and you have to leave. At the courthouse, there was no trial like in the movies. We just had to wait outside an ordinary office. I was not asked how I'd like our new family of only 3 to look. I was afraid the judge would make me choose, but that wasn't the case. I was called in with my brother, then our parents were called in. Everything was in a mutual agreement, but it was really my father's choice. He'd known for a long time he wanted to move out. Inside the DVD cover of Matrix, his favorite movie, he'd set aside money for a new apartment, where he moved with his new girlfriend. When I was 6, we went on holiday in Sovata, where he lied down on a beach towel while I wiped the salt off his back. 9 years later, a few months after the divorce, I'm in Sovata again, this time with him and his girlfriend. It's our first vacation together. Her presence annoys me. I can't help comparing her with my mother, and I cry in secret. After my father moved out, he became a different person. I saw him rarely. He called every now and then. He started criticizing everything we said, everything I did. He got angry, lit a cigarette, poured another glass of whiskey, and hurled all manner of insults at us. Sometimes he threw the TV remote at us. To him, I was a klutz. Before my 18th birthday, I told him I would like to attend my party. I would like him to attend my party. He said I couldn't tell him what to do, and he didn't come. At my high school graduation ceremony, he brought me a large bunch of flowers and then left. He said he found this type of event pathetic. Those first years after the divorce, he visited us a few times. The mood was always tense. We expected him to start criticizing one thing or another. Then he stopped coming back. Back when there were 4 of us at Christmas, before opening our presents, we used to sing a few songs by the Christmas tree with the lights off. After he moved out, I wondered how we could celebrate something so important without us and us without him. I'm 25, and we're taking my father to the hospital. I'm in the passenger seat, and this time my father is in the back seat. He lost his job after driving drunk. He will spend 5 weeks in rehab, but after he will keep drinking. I'm 26, the age my father was when I was born. So far, I've been in 2 serious relationships. Both partners smelled of tobacco and alcohol and thought of me as a klutz. Took me a few years and failed relationships to realize that unconsciously, I keep seeking to recreate the kind of dynamic I had with my father. I was attracted to people who were like him, arrogant, self-sufficient, self-confident, and distant towards me, and started gravitating toward them, determined to make myself loved. If, on the contrary, I met someone different, more like myself perhaps, I treated them with indifference. I wanted to prove in my relationship what I was unable to prove in my family, that I am strong and fearless. It didn't work. I was never enough. Each relationship ate away at my self-confidence until there was almost none left. The last time I saw him was on my 27th birthday. I invited him, hoping everything would be normal. He had quit drinking. After a bunch of teasing and insults from him, I burst into tears and wondered who this person was. I wanted to forgive him for that day and for many others, but every time I confronted him, he only answered dryly, "I did nothing wrong strategically." At 29, I no longer know anything about my father. I haven't spoken to him in 2 years. I'm still clinging to a vision of a father who doesn't exist, a character built from both real and imagined memories. The father who doesn't send me walking through the orchard at night, the father who doesn't scare me, the father who comes to my 18th birthday party. From time to time, I check his Facebook page. He is thin, but seems happy. He moved out of town and has a new family. In the last message he sent me, he asked, "How are you, little bug?" Can't fall for that again. So I don't reply. Bravo to them.
Thank you. Wow. That second story in particular is such a classic example of trying to find, the love that in that dynamic and replicate it. Thank you for your playing.
Thank you.
So I hope you were all, as I was, thinking about your own family during those readings. I'd like you to take 5 minutes, find someone nearby, figure out who's going to talk first, and exchange stories about your parents. Every time I do this, I find it impossible to get everybody to shut up after the 5 minutes. So I'll give it a few tries, but try to listen for my cue when I try to interrupt. And then it'd be great if people be brave enough and generous enough to share some of what you've been talking about. All right. So 5 minutes. Start now. Quiet, 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 quiet. Silence. Thank you. Wow. That actually, I'm learning some techniques here. First, I want to say before we do this, because I know I'll forget otherwise, I'm going to have a book signing of the Modern Love Anthology in the library following this event, and I'd be happy to meet and talk and sign books and with anybody. Secondly, when we end here, Jason Silva is going to pop up for a very short, probably energetic session for just a few minutes. So stay for that. Who would like to share stories about their family, their parents? What shaped you into the person you are? There's someone up here. Do we have here's Mike.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Marina, and I feel that there's a lot of power in voicing our stories, in saying them out loud after telling them only to ourselves quietly. So this is why I feel like maybe it's time to share this in a larger space than the small spaces I've created with my friends so far. It's basically what I've just shared with my new friend here. That's something that I took from my parents, apart from a lot of good stuff as well, is a lot of shame and a feeling of constantly being inadequate, no matter where I go. And 9 years ago, when I came to Bucharest, I was on my own. I started joining different NGOs, my jobs. I got into different projects. We went to events, and I would notice myself not feeling like I deserved to be there. I felt like a social case, like those people were just nice enough to have me there. Even in the most simple of things, like having coffee breaks and me being ashamed to actually eat something, because I was like, no, I'm just here to prove that I deserve to be here. Uh, so yeah, then I started to track it down to see where does this come from,
Yeah.
because I don't recognize it. It's not me, because I could also notice myself becoming this adult that does bold things, that's bravely going for what I wish to do in my life and who I want to become. But still I had these moments of deep shame and feeling inadequate. So I was like, okay, what's this? Who gave me this? Is this like some sort of mental health issue? Is this a broken narrative that keeps playing in my head? So yeah, then I looked at my family, and there's a long history of shame that went through our generations. My mom, up to these days, feels deep shame when it comes to me and my sister. She feels like we are ashamed with her, no matter how much we try to prove the opposite. Because it's this huge and sticky feeling that you can't really get rid of easily, what I started to do is to simply notice myself and say, this shame is not mine. I don't recognize it as mine. And then I extended this wave of healing to them as well. And every time I notice something, instead of trying to prove them wrong or convince them it's not how they feel about things, I just say this to myself: this shame is not ours. And maybe it is, but if it's ours, we have the power to play with it and to mold it into something else, so that the next generations will not have to take it further. So, thank you.
That's an incredibly healthy process, what you just described. Thank you. Anybody else? Over here.
Hi.
Hi.
So, first of all, last year, on Sunday, at Daniel Jones Unfinished Love Stories, I talked about my stepfather and my disconnection with him. And I thought about, when I saw the title, with family ties, I was like, okay, man, I'm gonna cry this year again. The difference between last year and this year is that I have my mom with me right now. And although I had the last few years, we have a good connection. But in spite of that, when I turned 20, I was like, I don't know, mad at so many things. And our connection changed in the last few years, but right now is in the best shape we've ever had. And although I focused on so many bad things in the last few years, like, why do I have this, why do I have that from you, and so many emotions, when you put that question, what do we took from our families, I wanted to take a moment and praise her today, because after the last talk about the education of our children, we listened to it together, I realized that my mom gave me the greatest gift. Without the parenting books or anything else, intuitively, she gave me that pyramid that you saw on the screen, fully completed. And without that, I couldn't be the adult, or I will not ever be the adult I will be in the future. Thank you.
That was so lovely. Thank you.
Cute.
By the way, when we talk about our families and our parents in particular, the word is not blame, the word is understanding. What you want to
There's
understand. Well, I'll give. Who else would like to share? Okay.
Thank you very much. It's a very beautiful moment, and what was shared just now was so moving, so thank you. I want to go a little bit in that line. I grew up in a challenging moment, but with a lot of love too. And I have 2 children, and I gave them a lot of love, but I also made a lot of mistakes. And so I think what just happened now, it's very beautiful to think about, because we really need to look at her family story, her parents, and herself with a lot of compassion. I think it's very, very important to understand that no matter what, we are all going to make mistakes, and to just let go and go on with compassion and love, and that's all what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Let me see what our time is. Oh, we're out of time, but let's take one more. Up in the top.
Hello. I'll try to keep it short. I was thinking about what I would absorb from my parents, and I wanted to say about 2 things. One from my mother. I am really touchy. My friends know that. Also, some strangers know that as well. In a consensual
Just
way.
the police know?
In a consensual way. I got that from my mother because when I was growing up, my father was a customs officer, and he would have night shifts. And although I could sleep by myself, I would like to sleep with her, and we would sleep hugging. And I think that's where I got this really touchy feeling, and I love that about myself, actually. And on the other part, regarding my father, I got this thing where it's really hard for me to ask for help, because he was like that, you are a man. You have to be strong, to be independent, to do all those things by yourself and not ask for help. What I wanted to do with those things is that to want to make you think about, reflect on those small things that your family, your parents did in the house, and that you maybe absorbed unconsciously or consciously, and think about that. Think about how they affect you in your life right now, and more importantly, I think, to actually talk with them about that, make them aware about that, and hope. I did that in the last few years, and my father did not really improve, because it's hard, but my mother has been doing so much better, because we started talking about how she was, how I was, how we were. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. That was fantastic.